Hearing of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will come to order. First, I want to thank our three witnesses for being here today to share their expertise on such an important topic. And I also want to take a moment to thank my ranking member, Senator Murphy, for his partnership on these issues, as well as the work we're doing together to repeal the Jackson-Vanik trade restrictions in Central Asia. It is time to put these antiquated Soviet-era trade restrictions to bed and further strengthen U.S. relations with the region. I'm very appreciative of his work on this issue. I'm looking forward to continuing to work with him on it. The Black Sea holds many of the keys for European security and U.S. national interests. A clearly defined Black Sea strategy is imperative to the United States effectively countering Russian aggression in Europe and elsewhere. Matthew Boyes is a retired career Foreign Service officer who served as Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs and has extensive experience as chargé in Switzerland, Finland, Romania, and the U.S. mission to NATO. In addition to his service as a Foreign Service officer, Mr. Boyes has written extensively about the Black Sea and its importance to the U.S. national interests. Frederick Starr is a longtime expert on the Caucasus, Central Asia, and the Black Sea. Mr. Starr is the founding chairman of the Central Asia Caucasus Institute and the Silk Road Studies Program, and is a distinguished fellow for Eurasia at the American Foreign Policy Council. Starr also served as founding chairman at the Keenan Institute, vice president of Tulane University, and president of Oberlin College. He has written numerous books about Central Asia and the Caucasus. Catherine Sendak joins us from the Center for European Policy Analysis, where she is the director of the Transatlantic Defense and Security Program. Prior to this, Ms. Sendak was the principal director for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, where she led efforts on addressing national security priorities, including great power competition with Russia and stability and security throughout Eastern Europe. Thank you again to each of our three witnesses for agreeing to appear here today. Now to the matter at hand. Energy security is national security, and this fact was made even more abundantly clear in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In some respects, Europe has made some positive changes, but the fact of the matter is that significant steps need to immediately be taken to protect Europe's future. Reliance on Russia for energy supply is a recipe for European acquiescence to Russian influence and aggression. The western side of the Black Sea presents a warning for the rest of the continent. The nations who border the Black Sea face profound challenges to their national security due to unreliable energy flows and lack of baseload power. They're all taking positive steps towards rectifying the situation, and their proactive action to address their insecurity should motivate the rest of Europe and encourage them to take steps to avoid a similar outcome. Now is the moment for practical energy solutions, which countries like Moldova, Romania, and Bulgaria are pursuing. The recent peace deal in the Caucasus uncorks Central Asia's vast energy resources and creates a future wherein these resources, as well as other sources of power, can flow, be they gas, oil, nuclear, hydro, or others, to build the reliable baseload power necessary for their economies and their national security. The eastern side of the Black Sea holds many of the solutions to problems found on the western side. Now is the moment for further engagement and for the Western world to stand together and facilitate reliable energy flows that will help ensure a bright and more secure future for the region. Beyond energy, the eastern shore of the Black Sea promises huge opportunities for Western commerce. The Caucasus and Central Asia contain large amounts of natural resources, much of which has not yet been fully utilized or even developed. Joint investment and westward trade flows will create a rising tide that truly lifts not just the countries of origin, but those along the trade route, as well as Europe and the broader Western world. What happens in Europe does not stay in Europe. 2 world wars have proven that fact. The United States must lead the rest of the world in fighting back against the encroachment of our adversaries. Without U.S. leadership and a secure Europe, we may once again find ourselves fighting a war, cold or otherwise, to protect the values of democracy and universal human freedom. My sincere hope for this hearing is that we can openly and honestly discuss U.S. Black Sea strategy, the importance of the region for global security, and work towards truly a more cohesive, comprehensive U.S. policy towards the region. This critically important part of the world needs more attention from the United States and our allies. And I hope today serves as the beginning of that new conversation. And with that, I'd like to recognize the distinguished ranking member for his comments, Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Chairman Daines, and I do look forward to continuing to work with you to draw us closer to our allies in Central Asia through the amendment of the antiquated restrictions built into the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. I hope that we can move that bipartisan legislation, that bipartisan effort through the Senate to the President's desk quickly. Thank you to the witnesses who are joining us here today. We are facing one of the most dangerous moments in U.S.-Russia relations since the end of the Cold War. Unable to militarily conquer Ukraine, but emboldened in part by American inaction, the Kremlin is pushing the boundaries with increasingly direct threats to NATO members. Within the last month, Russia sent nuclear-capable fighter jets into Estonia's airspace with their transponders turned off, and launched a swarm of over a dozen drones into Poland. The aggression has now spread to the Black Sea with a drone incursion into Romania. Putin is acting with virtual impunity, in part because he knows he will likely face zero consequences from President Donald Trump. The president who should be leading this response to show Putin these actions are unacceptable is not leading. The president has rolled out the red carpet for Vladimir Putin in Alaska, but Putin happily pocketed that diplomatic win and went right back to firebombing Kyiv and declined requests to enter serious negotiation. The administration's deadlines for peace talks have just come and gone, and yet they still refuse to support bipartisan sanctions legislation that's been pending now in the Senate for months. And there's been no new request for additional funding for Ukraine in Congress. As Britain's M16 chief noted recently, Russia does not have the wherewithal to fully subjugate Ukraine by force. So the only way that Moscow at this point can achieve its objectives is by weakening the United States and European support for Ukraine and exploiting divisions within and among NATO nations. And this is where our conversation today about the Black Sea region becomes so key. Russia is pursuing an aggressive strategy to undermine pro-Western democratic governments throughout Europe, and the Black Sea region is especially vulnerable. Moscow is pouring billions into bribery, propaganda, subversion, and energy bullying in order to install governments in this region that are friendly to Moscow. But the administration's response has been basically to unilaterally disarm. In Moldova, where a pro-Western government was facing a barrage of hybrid attacks from Russia ahead of the elections last weekend, the administration's response was to pull 2/3 of our assistance programs. While Russia is pouring billions into propaganda and influence campaigns, the administration shut down the capacity at the State Department to fight back against Russian propaganda, the Global Engagement Center. This Department of Justice has slashed anti-corruption programs and stopped enforcing the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which prevented American companies from paying bribes. At the same time that we know bribery is one of the main pathways for Russia to gain influence in this region. In Romania, a key NATO frontline state, the Trump administration is signaling they may draw down our military presence, once again weakening the argument for why citizens should back a pro-Western, pro-American government. History shows us that Russia does not respond to concessions or mixed signals. It responds to strength and to clear red lines. U.S. policy in the Black Sea region must reflect this reality. I thank our witnesses. I look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Murphy, thank you. Our first witness is Matthew Boyce, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute Center on Europe and Eurasia. Mr. Boyce, the floor is yours.
Chairman Daines, Ranking Member Murphy, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. The Black Sea and the broader Black Sea region, BSR, are more important to the U.S. national interest than is often appreciated. This hearing adds impetus to important work the SFRC has done, including by pressing the State Department and the interagency to develop a Black Sea strategy, by holding hearings, by traveling to the area, and by shining a light on a region of great geopolitical importance. Thank you so much for organizing this important conversation. The BSR is also important in the context of the ongoing debate within the United States foreign policy community about its priorities. Given the centrality of the BSR to the balance of power in Europe and Eurasia, and the negative trends there, the region should remain a major focus of U.S. foreign policy, even as the administration focuses on the paramount threat from communist China, challenges in the Western Hemisphere and the Middle East, and other issues. Now, Putin's war against Ukraine has higher stakes than just reincorporating that country into the Russian Federation. The BSR is indispensable to his efforts to restore status and project power regionally and globally. The BSR is also the primary battlefield for his efforts to reshape a new international order, together with Communist China, Iran, and others, and is an important laboratory for hybrid war against NATO. In recent years, Russia has been scoring successes on the eastern littoral of the Black Sea via its creeping state capture of Georgia. On the northern littoral, how Russia's war ends will affect the Black Sea region in a major way. And the Kremlin has been in a full court press mode in Moldova, even if on Sunday voters dodged a bullet and chose the West. On the western littoral, the Kremlin has been using its many assets in Bulgaria to turn that critical country away from NATO, and has been exploiting societal discontent in Romania, long a bulwark of Atlanticism. Russia's efforts in these states, via state capture, weakening key institutions, or supporting pro-Moscow forces, could create an arc or corridor of instability from Southeast Europe and the Balkans into the heart of Europe, including from northern Macedonia through to Serbia, Hungary, Slovakia, and Austria, all with governments amenable to Russian interests. Of course, this may not happen and should be strongly opposed, but it shows that trends in the BSR could ease Kremlin inroads into what Putin no doubt sees as potential soft underbelly of NATO. The southern littoral, of course, is a different case, as Turkey is both opposed to many and open to some Russian interests. Now, a comprehensive Black Sea strategy is necessary but insufficient to advance U.S. security interests and to counter Russian malign influence in the Black Sea region and its energy markets. Other political, diplomatic, military, or economic steps are necessary, which I'll touch on briefly in a minute. But just on energy, the USG should ramp up its engagement with BSR states to diversify further away from Russian sources, such as by supporting more LNG sales and nuclear energy cooperation, including SMRs. Now, the State Department strategy presented to this committee in October 2023 was a start, but it was not whole of government. It was more a laundry list of intentions, and it wasn't that focused on energy. It didn't really contain a timeline, and it wasn't well resourced. A strategy that focuses more on energy and it includes these issues could very well advance U.S. goals. But also, blunt language like we recently saw from President Trump also reminds allies and friends that the U.S. cannot want European energy security more than they do. Now, for trade and commerce to flourish in the Black Sea region, the Black Sea must remain free and open. Freedom of navigation is essential. That is not currently the case. Yes, trade takes place, but the war negatively affects trade and economic relations and the BSR role as a trade crossroads over the millennia. Crimea under Russian control considerably increases Moscow's ability to mess with the Black Sea region. And if Russia were ever to control the entire northern littoral, part of what Putin calls Novorossiya, it would strangle Ukraine's maritime access to global markets. This must not happen. The optimum outcome for trade, economic growth, and peace and prosperity in this broad region is a demilitarized Black Sea, as it was the case for a time after the Crimean War. Now, the USG has many tools, many ways to advance its strategic interests in the Black Sea region. I'll only mention a few here as I'm running out of time, but happy to go into more and in more detail in the discussion. I think the USG should look at the BSR holistically as a geopolitical region of major importance to NATO and thus to the United States. I think the EU should be urged to focus much more on the Black Sea region now that the Commission in May finally adopted a Black Sea strategy. I think allies should be pressed to further reduce the flow of funds to the Russian war machine. NATO should be seized with the BSR. A whole of government strategy is needed, as you've called for. I believe that Black Sea security should be mentioned in the Trump administration's national security strategy. I believe that USG must not recognize Crimea as Russian territory. And of course, there are many other issues, for example, by vigorously engaging with Turkey as steward of the Montreux Convention to prevent Russia from returning the Black Sea Fleet to pre-war status after hostilities end. And of course, there are also such issues as the Three Seas Initiative, revitalizing that, working with our great Romanian allies. But perhaps the best thing to do is just to stop here. There's much more that can be said, and my time is up. I've submitted a statement for the record that goes into greater detail. I thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Boyce, thank you. Dr. Fred Starr, Chairman of the Central Asia Caucasus Institute and Silk Road Studies Program. Dr. Starr, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First, I'd like to applaud the chairman and ranking member for their attention to this issue. That yours is a bipartisan initiative makes your attention all the more important. Attention both to the Black Sea region and, I should say, Jackson Vanik. Bravo. Let me start with a note on the geopolitical context. Our focus on the Baltic countries is urgently needed, for they're under existential threat from Mr. Putin. However, the entire Black Sea region is also in crisis, and for the same reason. The difference is that Washington has yet fully to acknowledge Black Sea issues. Like the Baltic area, the Black Sea region includes 3 members of NATO, Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey. NATO and the U.S. maintain 3 military bases in Turkey and an important one in Romania. Like the Baltic, the Black Sea plays an important economic role as a gateway to the world's oceans. Without it, Europe's second longest river, the Danube, would be cut off from world shipping lanes. Russia seeks to militarize and monopolize both the Baltic and the Black Sea, challenging Europe and the United States. It uses the Black Sea to control access to the West by the 3 countries of the Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. For the 5 Central Asian countries, the Black Sea is crucial for their access to the West, and the West's access to their energy, oil, gas, and also minerals. Beyond this, Russia still maintains the most powerful military presence on the Black Sea and continues to be able to use its assets there to project power into the Middle East, Africa, and beyond. Now, my written testimony details existing U.S. strategy for the region and identifies some areas where updating and change are called for. Here, however, let me focus on what a strategy embracing current realities might include. A revised strategy should be based on this committee's 2023 document on the region, but has to comb out its irrelevancies and be more blunt in identifying and addressing threats. So let me offer 6 possible elements of a revised U.S. strategy for the region. First, add Ukraine, Moldova, and the 3 countries of the Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, to the list of states with direct vital interests in the Black Sea. Also, acknowledge the critical importance of a free and open Black Sea for Western access to the resources of the 5 countries of Central Asia, and for those countries to enable those countries to build economic ties with the West that can balance the tide of investment that is coming to them from China and Russia. Second, affirm the United Nations General Assembly's resolution of 27 March 2014, declaring that Crimea belongs to Ukraine, and help Ukraine to implement it. Third, consistent with NATO's forward posture, strengthen the naval capacities of Bulgaria and Romania, and work with other countries to assist non-NATO members, non-NATO member Ukraine, to strengthen its navy. Fourth, establish a rotating NATO naval presence in the Black Sea. Fifth, to ensure regional buy-in through regular consultations, establish a permanent Black Sea Council. And sixth, acknowledge Turkey's special relevance and interest in Black Sea security and engage Turkey more actively in advancing the above goals. Now, these are just suggestions of how our current strategy might be updated to confront current realities. But let me conclude with a very different note. These suggestions identify today's Russia as a malign force in the Black Sea region. However, President Putin's assault on Ukraine is faltering badly, and Russia is on the brink of bankruptcy. We grossly underestimate the significance of both these developments, which are disgracefully underreported in the American press and in American political discourse. A post-Putin Russia is already dawning, but its contours remain totally unknown. I therefore urge your committee as a whole to begin now to review U.S. strategy in light of all the most likely lines of Russia's further evolution. Thank you very much.
Dr. Starr, thank you for your testimony. Catherine Sendak, Director of the Transatlantic Defense and Security Program at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Ms. Sendak, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chairman Daines, Ranking Member Murphy, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Europe and Regional Security Cooperation. It is an honor to address you today on this critical and timely matter of U.S. national security and policy. I should note that the views expressed in this testimony do not reflect those of the Center for European Policy Analysis or its staff and fellows. CEPA for the past 20 years has spent a lot of time focusing on the Black Sea, producing a lot of analysis and recommendations, looking how to highlight the importance of the region to both European and global security. While much of the policy focus has centered on the war inside Ukraine, rightfully so, the broader regional strategy, particularly concerning the Black Sea, as was stated before, remains severely ill-defined and underdeveloped. This gap in a comprehensive, well-defined, and well-resourced Black Sea strategy puts long-term prospects for stability and security at risk, not only in Ukraine, but across the European continent. We have a real opportunity to seize the momentum set forward, a path for tangible policy and achievable, sustainable security in the Black Sea region. There are reasons to approach security challenges in the region with some optimism and some pragmatism. In the wake of what looks like to be a majority victory for the Party of Action and Solidarity, the pro-EU party in Moldova, a concentrated Western attention on Black Sea security in light of Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine and its ongoing aggressive actions in the region, increased investment on defense technology and capabilities, and plussed-up defense resources across the West, the time is now. I had the opportunity to lead a year-long study on Ukraine long-term security cooperation and assistance published earlier this year. As a part of that study, we assessed the critical requirements for stability and security in Ukraine with reaching effects of security in the broader region. In order to achieve long-term stability and security on the European continent, the US and NATO should undertake the following in the Black Sea region. One, we must enable Ukraine to defend its territorial sovereignty over the long term. That has far-reaching impacts to the security of the entire region. We must draft, resource, and implement clear, concise, and cohesive Black Sea strategies, both in the United States, NATO, and we need to take a look at US-Russia policy. And finally, we need to provide sustained US leadership in the region, including engagement, presence, and assist our Black Sea NATO allies to further cooperation to bring unified security. As we know, the Black Sea region sits at the crossroads of Europe, the Caucasus, the Middle East, and Central Asia, with a contested and competitive security environment. And we know crucial to Russia's foreign policy objectives is to control the methods and means of commerce and trade in the Black Sea and enjoy unhampered access to project power to other theaters, including the Middle East, the Eastern Mediterranean, and Africa. The threats from Russia, as we know, in Black Sea region and all over Europe are well known. Militarily in Ukraine, Transnistria, and Georgia, politically, as we've seen over the weekend in Moldova and their attempts to derail that democratic process, and of course, hybrid actions that are continuing day by day. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the connections of everything else happening on the European continent with Russia hybrid actions and connecting those dots to what's happening in the Black Sea region. As was mentioned before by the ranking member and others here, the drone incursions, the air incursions in Poland and Estonia, both triggering Article 4 sessions at NATO, the potential drone incursions in Denmark and Norway going on right now, the bombing of the EU building in Kyiv, the GPS jamming of President von der Leyen's plane. These are all cumulative in nature. Russia testing what Europe and the West will actually respond to and react to and try to deter against. Let me briefly just go over my recommendations again, and I welcome the questions, any questions you all have about these. Enabling Ukraine to defend its territorial sovereignty over the long term. So our study took a look at multiple year authorities and multi-year funding for consistent and sustained support and assistance from Congress. We also suggested a 5-year memorandum of understanding between the US and Ukraine, providing a full set of objectives and goals and resources to solidify the partnership. That partnership and solidifying that partnership over the long term will provide consistency and have ripple effects throughout the region. Security cooperation and assistance programs spanning the spectrum of issue sets, military, civilian, reforms, education, creating the opportunity for substantive generational capacity building and change throughout the region. Drafting, resourcing, and implementing Black Sea strategies in a US-Russia policy are clear. We need to relook at the US Black Sea strategy and how to implement that further. We need to create a Black Sea strategy at NATO, and the US must examine a comprehensive US-Russia policy moving forward. And then finally, US leadership is so critical in this space, including engagement and presence and assisting our Black Sea NATO allies, Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey, to work together further, taking their mine countermeasure task group and expanding it into other domains, including maritime domain awareness, intelligence sharing. The opportunities are great, and we look forward to those opportunities. If the US and NATO do not take these actions, then Russia and other potential adversaries will have the unfettered ability to continue to destabilize Ukraine and Black Sea nations and control the strategic terrain, to include the commerce that flows through it, not only putting European stability at risk, but also the global economy. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Sendak. Start with Dr. Starr. Reflecting on our former colleague, Senator McCain's famous comment he made in 2014, shortly, I believe, after Russia invaded Crimea, when he said Russia is a gas station masquerading as a country. We look back on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it's become undeniable that energy security and national security are intertwined. In fact, one could argue energy security is national security, and that Europe's reliance on Russian energy is both a regional security as well as economic risk. My question, Dr. Starr, is do you believe that the development of the middle corridor, as we saw what's occurred now with that historic August 8th signing of the peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia, when we had both President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan here in Washington, that President Trump got that deal put together. Do you see that as a means to uncork the energy potential of the Caucasus and Central Asia, and how that might change the landscape of European energy flow for the better, especially on NATO's eastern flank?
Important issue. This didn't begin yesterday. It's been more than a decade since the Baku-Ceyhan pipeline was opened. There was so much skepticism about that in this country that we organized a motorcycle run from Azerbaijan on the Caspian all the way to Turkish port of Ceyhan in order to deliver the first oil from Central Asia to Europe by motorcycle. My point is this. Yes, it is possible to go through a land corridor for energy from Central Asia, from the Caspian region. However, it would be better to have backups and multiple systems, one that would include across the Black Sea. But if the Black Sea is dominated by Russia and it has its own energy interests at issue, obviously that won't work. So yes, the so-called middle corridor is very important, but at the same time, it can't rely solely on the land route through the Caucasus. It should also have the alternative of a sea route through the Black Sea.
Thank you, Dr. Starr, for your insights on that. Appreciated. Mr. Boyce, I want to continue on this theme of energy security. In May of this year, western states of the Black Sea region began construction of a vertical gas corridor as a means to push energy into starved parts of Europe. Mr. Boyce, do you believe that U.S. allies in countries like Romania would benefit from such a proposal? And could this idea succeed where the Nabucco pipeline and other energy projects have failed?
Yeah, that's a very important question because it gets to this whole question of diversifying routes, diversifying sources, and expanding the options to ensure that energy security, that the countries of that region are secure and don't need to rely on Russian sources, which brings all sorts of opportunities for malign influence, which we've seen over the course of many, many years. Now, usually the discussion is the main principle is that the more projects like this, the better, because the sources of energy that Romania is enormous, is blessed with enormous resources, hydrocarbons, fossil fuels in the Black Sea and on land. But it's sort of the corridor through which some of the more those countries that are not blessed with those resources need to go. And so this project has been, it's been long in the making, actually, in the conceptualizing. I mean, it actually goes back almost 10 years in terms of when it was first a bright idea in some foresighted people's minds. It's taken quite a long time for it to get off the ground. It's about time that it's happening. It's going to be a good thing when it finally starts to produce the sorts of diverse supplies that the countries that Ukraine needs, that Moldova needs, that Hungary needs, that Slovakia needs, and so we should welcome this and support it in every way we can.
Thank you, Mr. Boyce. Ranking Member Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Sendek, we've seen both the capability and the limitations of Russian military force in Ukraine. As I mentioned, intelligence estimates are that this will likely be some form of a stalemate for a long period of time. Thus, Russia is going to be more reliant on non-military means, as they always have been, to try to undermine support for Ukraine and to undermine pro-Western governments. And we see all of the myriad ways that Russia uses funding for corrupt politicians, misinformation campaigns, just outright intimidation in order to get what it wants. And yet, as I mentioned in my opening testimony, this administration has effectively shuttered many of the tools that we use to fight Russian asymmetric warfare techniques. The Trump administration has slashed funding for pro-democracy programs in the Black Sea region, which are run by NDI and RIRI. As I mentioned, it shut down the Global Engagement Center, which chased down a lot of Russian propaganda in and around the Black Sea region. It's withdrawn from working groups with European countries to expose and counter anti-Western and anti-U.S. Russian-backed disinformation in the Black Sea region. Is there any way to support democracies, pro-Western democracies in the Black Sea if the United States is not actively engaged in trying to counter the non-military ways that Russia seeks to gain influence and undermine governments that are supportive of the West and supportive of a democratic future?
Thank you, Senator Murphy. It's an excellent question. I think that one that the United States has tried to tackle for many years on how do we address this hybrid threat in a very holistic and tactical way. We have seen successes in some respects, and I would say a lot of failures. We play reaction mode a lot when it comes to these things. And as you mentioned, and I mentioned in my opening testimony, Russia's constantly testing the waters to see what they can get away with. I would say holistic support and assistance for these democracies is really important, and understanding it's not just about mill-to-mill conversations or relationships, it's not just about civilian, it's not just about one sector, it's about all sectors. And I think we can see that in Ukraine. Prior to Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, we saw a majority of programs that we helped Ukraine with really not necessarily even being military, right? Standing up agencies, understanding budget processes, really weedsy things. So they understood capacity building and how to do this. I think it's very important that U.S. leadership is here. The Black Sea region is a nexus of many organizations and alliances, and the U.S. has an opportunity to lead that from various venues and various streams of effort to really have a holistic perspective. So yes, sir, I agree that a holistic approach to these problems is necessary.
I would point to our support for independent media in Moldova. I know this becomes a fraught political issue, support for countering propaganda overseas, because a lot of conservatives worry that that is going to prejudice certain types of speech as propaganda. But in Moldova, there's really no way to have a fact-based narrative without there being some support for independent truth-telling, because Russia commands so much of that space. And so I appreciate that answer. Mr. Boyce, I wanted to sort of stay on this thread of how we use non-military funds to support our allies in the Black Sea. And I agree with Senator Daines that energy independence is a key goal for the region. And it was always curious to me that in the wake of the early invasion of Ukraine by Russian proxies, we spent $4 billion on something called the European Reassurance Initiative, but it was basically all bread and butter military programming. Had we spent maybe $1 billion of that $4 billion on helping Eastern Europe, and the Black Sea become energy independent of Russia, we might not be in the position that we are today. And so I always find it curious that I agree with Senator Daines that energy security is national security. And I guess my question is, should we be considering putting sort of hard U.S. national security dollars into regional energy independence projects? Should we start to fund energy independence in the same way that we fund military support for the region? A lot more projects could get done there if the United States was willing to put some muscle behind it.
That's a question, Senator Murphy, that is near and dear to my heart because I was the Sherpa for the Three Seas initiative during most of the Trump administration, and we were actually making a fair amount of progress on and energy is one of the three pillars. And much of although the investment that did in fact go into the Three Seas investment fund, a lot of it went into the energy pillar. That initiative has a lot more potential than has been realized. And I hope that the Trump administration takes it up again because there's a lot of goodness there, a lot of interest on the part of our allies in the region, the members of the Three Seas world, and there are as you say taxpayer dollars that are available for this through the DFC. I think that so to the extent that that we can sort of revitalize this or get this kind of going again, I think there would be a lot of receptivity on the part of the countries themselves. Many of the countries in the region have been the beneficiaries of U.S. investment via the DFC and via the Three Seas Investment Fund. There's so much more potential there. The needs are enormous. The investment needs are enormous. The capital markets are available for this too, because a lot of the investment that is going into the Neptune Deep field, for example, in offshore Romania, and has been going into the pipelines and has been going into offshore wind farms and onshore wind farms, and would go into investment in Bulgarian the Bulgarian EEZ and its territories as well. Not to mention Turkey is available. So there is a considerable amount, of course, available in the capital markets too, because those will be profitable. But here again, this whole question of freedom of navigation and the peaceful nature of the Black Sea could be affected by the investment in some of this infrastructure that will help these countries grow further, become energy independent, et cetera. A lot of that actually could be impacted negatively if the war if Russia's war against Ukraine ends in an unsatisfactory manner. In other words, if Putin wins this or ends this war on his terms, because even there's a U.S. firm, Black Sea Oil and Gas, which has been exploiting resources in Romanian waters, working with Romanian partners for a number of years now. They have talked about what it's like to be drilling in the Black Sea and then being buzzed by Russian planes, or have Russian ships plying not very far from their drilling platforms. And so you can just imagine, given the vast energy resources that are contained in these in the waters of, let's say, of Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, etc. And even Ukraine now, of course, much of that has been taken over by Russia. But this has enormous potential. And when the maritime domain is dominated by Russia, and this threat continues or exists, you have people are less likely to invest, or it becomes much more expensive, or it becomes much more risky. And so it's important that we try to keep the maritime domain peaceful, stable, etc., so that all the vast energy needs in Europe can be supplied in part by the countries on the Black Sea which do have such major resources themselves. In addition, of course, to the other ways that the U.S. taxpayer or the USG, for example, could support that in additional ways. Thank you.
I want to shift gears for a moment and talk about probably maritime security and specifically the Bosphorus. I know every time you fly in and out of Istanbul, if you're transiting or stopping there, you're coming in to final approach, you just look at all the ships, cargo, and the containers that are backed up going in and through there, that very important part of the world. I think most estimates suggest it's about 6% of global trade transits through the Bosphorus. It's an economic conduit, obviously facilitating energy, agriculture, raw minerals, and the economic disruptions caused by the war in Ukraine impact truly the whole of the globe. It's kind of their Strait of Hormuz, pinch point certainly for the world. My question for everybody, I'd like each of you maybe to answer this, is how do we work with our allies to invest in maritime security and to ensure that Russia or other adversaries don't stifle navigation and trade? Dr. Starr, we'll start with you, but I'm going to ask the whole panel to give some thought to that question. Dr. Starr?
It's a worthy question. The reality is, at the moment, the Black Sea is closed because Russia has imposed, except for a very narrow corridor along the coast, the northern coast, in a sense, a no-sail zone. And that hasn't been broken. It's been cracked, but not broken. What is the need? How do you go about this? Rather than give you a formula, some slick answer, let me instead raise the question of how do you approach an answer? And I would suggest you don't do it by a bunch of bilateral deals, by a bunch of bilateral consultations. We don't have a Black Sea Council that we could work with. We are going singly. You know, in a sense, we divide and Russia conquers. What's needed is more regional approaches on everything. I've suggested expanding the Black Sea concept to include the Caucasus, to include Moldova, to include Ukraine, which isn't yet. I mean, it's not a member of NATO after all. Expand the group and deal with this as a group problem that needs a group solution, because country by country, you can't solve this Rubik's Cube.
Thank you for that insight.
Hence the need for a Black Sea Council.
Well, it's think about the Caucasus too. In terms of Georgia has
add it to them.
Oceanfront property there on the Black Sea. Absolutely, Ms. Sendek, your thoughts.
Thank you so much, and tagging along to Dr. Starr's comments, you know, it is really critical. We have seen Ukraine be so successful in the Black Sea in terms of fighting back against Russia's Black Sea fleet, down 30%, pushed back off of Crimea, which is a huge success. But exactly to your point, how do we open this up consistently to commerce and economics? This is why I think a great suggestion is broadening what the NATO allies on the Black Sea can do. I do believe NATO should be talking now about how to start opening up the Black Sea to non-Black Sea allies. I think that's a really important step in a series of discussions that NATO should be having now, of course, in light of Turkey and the Montreux Convention. But I would say the opportunities for Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey to come together, agree on a list of items to push forward in a leadership position at the alliance, and really come at this from a position of this is our neighborhood. We're going to take these things on, much like what we've seen in the Baltic Sea. I think what we've seen from our Baltic allies is the ability to speak with one voice on threat and speak with one voice about how they would like to see the security of their region look. And I think the opportunity is there for our NATO allies in the Black Sea to do the same. And that leadership should have the ripple effect that we might be seeking in terms of stability on the sea.
Ms. Sindick, you brought up Turkey, and I think when you look at the map, nobody has more square footage than Turkey in terms of frontage on the Black Sea. Thoughts on Turkey?
Yes. Well, you know, we have seen them pivot to a little bit more concentration in the Black Sea, which I think is a very positive step. And I see them having obviously a huge leadership role in the Black Sea. Given the Bosphorus, given the Montreux Convention, letting people in and out and ships in and out, it's a critical role. And I think the more that we can incorporate, I think Dr. Starr mentioned in his opening statement, the more we can incorporate Turkey's role in this in a leadership position with their other allies, I think is absolutely critical. They're mentioned frequently in the EU Black Sea strategy, knowing full well that their buy-in and leadership is absolutely critical to make any of this happen.
Thanks, Ms. Sendek. Mr. Boyce.
Oh, there's some activity already going on already. But at first, I should sort of hats off to the Ukrainian military for actually keeping the Black Sea sort of relatively, sort of at least part of it open. Because right now we have the Russian Black Sea Fleet pretty much bottled up in Novorossiysk and unable to operate even freely, even if it is able to put at risk a lot of ship traffic, maritime traffic in the body of water itself. But of the things that are, and so that I think the fact that there is some, there's still commerce going on is actually a tribute in large part to them, as well as to our Turkish allies who've helped to keep that open. But how do you, there's a fair amount of, there's some activity going on right now. It's been going on now for a number of months with this sort of NATO mine measures group that exists between Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria that are trying to get rid of nobody knows how many mines are actually in the Black Sea, but they do threaten freedom of navigation because they make, first of all, they're a threat to shipping. They raise insurance rates. I mean, they make it much more risky to apply commercially. And so this effort, which is a great start, I think needs more attention because there are so many mines. I mean, usually people talk about 400. Sometimes people talk about in the thousands. Nobody quite knows, but they wash up on shores every so often, and the mine measures group finds them every so often. But I think that would actually be how can you not support that? That would be a very, very useful way of trying to keep these trade routes open and to support freedom of navigation. Otherwise, I mean, there's a lot of some of it has to do with domain awareness because some of it also has to do with the pushing back on intrusions. I mean, for example, Russia has Russian ships have boarded commercial vessels in Bulgarian waters. And of course, this is really, I don't know if we would call it piracy, but it's essentially, this is not kosher. And it should be. I think in cases like this, with Russia sort of testing and probing and pushing and engaging in behavior which is illegal according to the laws, laws of maritime in the maritime domain. There needs to be a response to this. It can't just be sort of ignored. And because as long as NATO member states don't impose don't react or don't impose some costs on Russia for behavior like this, that affects the freedom of navigation in a body of water that should be free and open, the Russia will continue to do it. And so this question of reciprocity or sort of pushing back in ways that demonstrate that this will not be. This is not acceptable. Will have a more effect, I think, on Russian behavior than other more diplomatic ways.
Before I turn it back to Ranking Member Murphy, Dr. Starr, I can just tell you've got something else you want to say. You were scribbling some notes here. Did you want to add any more? Because you led off on this round robin interview. Do you have something else you want to add to it?
Thank you very much.
I'm reading this. Read the witnesses here for a moment. It looks like you've got something else you want to say.
I thank you. I was thinking about comments you made, and I think we all agree there's no debate about the absolute important centrality of energy, oil and gas, and of crucial minerals and so on. But that is, if we only do that, we won't get to where we want to get. And I think Senator Murphy has made this point. What do you do then? Well, look what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the many countries whose long-term fate is absolutely not clear at this point. We're, of course, Ukraine. We're also Moldova. Look at the situation there. Positive steps very recently. We'll see. Georgia, my goodness, what a complex mess that is at the moment. Armenia, Azerbaijan, well, they've recently taken very significant steps, but the issue isn't clear there either. And I'm not even going to dwell on all of Central Asia, which is a region that is of much greater importance to us than merely energy, and to the West than merely energy and resources. It's important because this is a new zone of independent and sovereign states that are doing remarkably well after shuffling around for a generation or so after the collapse of the USSR. Their post-colonial recovery has been remarkable, very impressive. Now, the question is, are we going to do the things that are needed to enable them to continue that kind of progress toward relatively open societies, relatively participatory, with normal business relations with an increasing number of American firms? Are we going to advocate that and do what's necessary to develop it further, or are we going to just sit on the back as observers and focus only on energy and resources? I think we've got to do both. And that is a key to the Black Sea, because by focusing on these impressive countries, Moldova, my goodness, look what they just have been through. Ukraine, there's no need to discuss their heroism. This is look how Romania has emerged as a regional leader. There are real developments, complex tendencies within Turkey today, but some very promising ones too. I think we have to keep in mind not just the immediate concern over energy, but especially what is going to be the fate of these regions. And my assertion here, in answer to your needling me a little bit, which I appreciate, my assertion is that I think we can't do this on a country-by-country basis. We have to define a new region and institutionalize it in a way that makes sense to us.
Dr. Starr, thank you for those comments. Appreciate it. I completely agree with the geopolitical importance of that part of the map of the world, as you just articulated. Ranking Member Murphy.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sinek, this is 2025, not 1955. Europe is in a position to defend itself in a way that it was not when we made our initial commitment through NATO. I believe in that NATO treaty. I believe in Article 5, but I also think it's absolutely time for the members of NATO on the other side of the Atlantic to take more responsibility for their collective defense. At the same time, this is an incredibly fraught moment. I mean, the moment we're literally sitting in today as jets are flying over the heads of our European partners, as drones are being flown into Romanian airspace, into Polish airspace. And yet we are hearing reports that the Trump administration is considering withdrawing some of our troop presence from Romania, subject of today's hearing, and from Poland. Again, I don't necessarily believe in a world where the United States permanently has to have 60, 70, 100,000 troops in Europe. But at this moment, like right now, it would seem to be a curious time to send a signal that we're pulling out as drones and jets are flying in from Russia. What's your sense of the signal we would be sending to Putin if in the next 30 days we got an announcement from the Trump administration that they were pulling troops out of some of these frontline states?
Thank you for the question, Senator Murphy. Obviously, U.S. presence in Europe has been tantamount to ensuring the security over the past 75 years. I had the privilege of working on the House Armed Services Committee several years ago at the start of 2015, where we were spending money on European Reassurance Initiative, as you pointed out, then became European Deterrence Initiative, where we flooded the zone with pre-positioned equipment, rotational forces, training and exercises, which we're still doing today, which is completely and utterly necessary to increase deterrence value. I agree with you completely. I think Europe has received the message, and our NATO allies have received the message that they need to increase their capabilities and capacity, and they're doing that. But we are at a very critical juncture where that has not happened completely yet. And none of us have exactly what we need in a potential conflict. I think as we look at this, U.S. presence is absolutely crucial, not just from the sense of what do we want to do in Europe, but that's power projection for ourselves. We're not just in Europe to, train and exercise. We're there to be part of an alliance. We're there to ensure security and stability. And it has far reaches past the Black Sea, past the Caucasus, into Central Asia, et cetera. So I think it is absolutely critical that the U.S. remains a strong presence on the European continent.
I have one final question. I'll pose it to you, Dr. Starr. I think one of the most extraordinary directives that has come out of this State Department is a prohibition on our embassies opining on the fairness of elections. So our ambassadors have been told, even if you think that it's a rigged election, don't say it. That seems to be an invitation for a country like Russia to come in and play games because they are just not going to be called out on their provocations, on their corruption. I think that's extraordinary and I think very damaging to the United States' reputation, our power around the world, and our aligned democracies. You sort of teased the question of what's happening in Georgia today. This is a country that had made great progress, that was a fraught but working democracy with balance on both sides. And today we have a ruling party in Georgia that has reversed the progress on European integration, has moved dramatically backwards away from democratic norms. There have been huge protests, and yet they still have pushed forward laws that suggest this country is sliding into something very, very different than a democracy. There's a headline out of Georgia that reads, "As USAID dies, many of Georgia's vibrant civil society organizations face extinction." Just like it would be a really bad moment right now for the United States to pull military support from a region of the world that is having Russian military incursions on a weekly basis, it seems like a really bad time for the United States to be pulling support for civil society and pro-democracy groups in Georgia. Well, there is still an open question as to whether Georgian democracy survives. What's your recommendation on what this administration should be doing to try to push back against this really troubling trend line in the country of Georgia?
Well, first, hats off to the Georgians for what they have accomplished over the decades since independence. It's not been an easy path. Remember, they were invaded by Putin in 2008. We did next to nothing. And therefore our authority there was qualified by that neglect. Just as our authority in Ukraine was qualified by our failure to do anything after Putin stole Ukraine in 2014. So in general, though, it seems to me that we can be a little bit more optimistic than your question implies. Why do I say, with regard to Georgia, why do I say that? Because Putin is not a long-termer. It's over. Exactly when and how it will be over, it's over. He doesn't have the resources. He doesn't have the manpower. He doesn't have the export that he did have, and he has a society that is deeply, deeply alienated, not by the war, but by the economic hardship that is now felt by everyone outside of the two major cities. He's going to be out of there sooner than we think. And the minute that happens, Mr. Ivanishvili, even though he's moved his money out of Russia, he's out. And the whole situation in Georgia will change. I think we should be concentrating on what's going on in Russia. I do agree with you that we accomplished a lot through our support for various democratic institutions during that period. I also have to admit, having been an election observer several times in Central Asia, that there have been cases where officially sponsored observers by the U.S. have actually missed the reality and distorted things, which is widely known locally. So I'm for moderation on that. not elimination, but moderation, but concentrating on the dominant issue throughout the region, and that is what's going to follow Putin in Russia. If it's more of the same or worse, we should be planning for it. If it's a dramatic change for the better, as occurred after the disastrous Russian defeat in the Crimean War in the 19th century, disastrous, that produced an age of reform. That's when they emancipated 90 million serfs before we freed slaves, 2 years before Lincoln. That's when they created a new legal system. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but we have to consider all post-Putin possibilities because they are going to determine the validity of what we propose and do now.
Well, it is certainly true that throughout history, it is the overextension of Russian military power that has led to collapse of Russian regimes. It is probably also true that it's been generally a bad bet to bet on Russian enlightenment following those moments of leadership change. But I think it's an important caution. We were told forever, for instance, that Assad was weak. It was just a matter of time. It seemed to be a fool's errand, and then all of a sudden, overnight, he was gone. And maybe we didn't spend enough time planning for that moment because we just didn't believe that it was true. And so it's, I think, wise counsel for us to think about how you would manage a post-Putin Russia, and maybe an opportunity for this committee to engage in important inquiry and a little bit of trolling at the same time.
Noted there. Okay. Well, thank you. Sincere thank you to a great back and forth and dialogue on some very complicated issues in a complicated part of the world. A sincere thank you to all of our witnesses for attending today and providing us with the benefit of your testimony. For the information of members, the record will remain open until the close of business tomorrow, October 1st. We ask the witness to respond as promptly as possible. Your response will also be made a part of the record. With the thanks of this committee, the hearing is now adjourned.